Otto Gunscher was Hitler's personal aide and one of those responsible for burning his body after his suicide. He was captured by the Red Army in May 1945 and spent 10 years in Soviet prisons, accused of being a direct accomplice to the Führer's inner circle. After his release in 1956, he lived discreetly in West Germany. He died in 2003. Heinz Linger, Hitler's butler from 1935, was also present in the bunker until the very end and helped prepare the dictator's body after his death. Captured by the Soviets, he was interrogated and imprisoned for over a decade. Released in 1955, he wrote his memoirs, revealing previously unpublished details about Hitler's daily life. He died in 1980. Rochus Misch, a telephone operator and bodyguard, was the bunker's last survivor. He was captured by the Soviets and spent 9 years in a gulag. Years later, he gave interviews and wrote a book telling his version of events, showing no remorse for his role in the regime. He died in 2013, the last direct witness of the bunker. Emil Morris was Hitler's original bodyguard and one of the founders of the SS. Despite being of Jewish descent, he was protected by Hitler himself with an honorary blood certificate. After the war, he was briefly arrested by the Allies but was not convicted of war crimes. He lived the rest of his life in Germany and died in 1972. Otto Gunscher, the man who saw Hitler die and spent 10 years as a prisoner of the Soviets. Otto Gunscher was born on September 24, 1917, in Jena, in the Free State of Thuringia, Germany. From a young age, he displayed an almost religious attachment to authority structures and nationalist ideals. In 1934, at just 17 years old, he joined the Hitler Youth. 2 years later, in 1936, he enlisted in the SS, the paramilitary organization that served as the elite guard of the National Socialist Party. His entry was not accidental. From the beginning, Gunscher displayed iron discipline, unquestioning loyalty, and absolute devotion to Adolf Hitler, qualities that would quickly make him stand out. That same year, he was transferred to the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler Regiment, a unit originally conceived as the Führer's personal escort. The Leibstandarte functioned as a breeding ground for future elite Nazi cadres. There, Gunscher began to forge his relationship with those closest to power. His sober character, his discretion, and his ideological fanaticism transformed him into a trustworthy young soldier in the eyes of his superiors. Between 1936 and 1939, Gunscher continued his military training and rose through the ranks of the SS. With the invasion of Poland in 1939, he actively participated as part of the Leibstandarte Regiment, which was no longer merely a ceremonial force, but a tough fighting corps, becoming an armed wing of the regime's crimes. During the Western Campaign of 1940, which included the invasion of France, Gunscher fought with distinction. He was wounded in combat and decorated for his performance. In the following years, he also took part in the Eastern Front as part of Operation Barbarossa, where brutality reached extreme levels. However, unlike other SS officers, his service record was not marked by acts of sadism or publicity. Gunscher was, above all, a soldier loyal to his leader. His low-key profile, combined with his dedication and unwavering loyalty, led Hitler to appoint him as one of his personal assistants in 1943. From that moment on, his life was completely tied to the Führer's destiny. His role was not political, but operational and symbolic. He was to be always available, coordinate logistical aspects, accompany Hitler on his travels, and eventually give his life if necessary. The appointment implied more than responsibility. It was a death oath. Unlike other members of Hitler's inner circle, Gunscher was neither an intellectual nor a strategist. His mission was different. To be the silent soldier, the discreet bodyguard, the man who would do whatever was necessary for his supreme commander. This role would intensify dramatically from 1944 onwards as Germany entered its final phase, and Gunscher's figure would become even more central. In 1944, Otto Gunscher was promoted to SS Hauptsturmführer, and his bond with Adolf Hitler became closer than ever. From that year on, his role as personal aide transformed. He was no longer just a silent shadow, but a privileged witness to the decline of the Third Reich. Hitler, increasingly isolated and distrustful, needed figures around him in whom he could place absolute loyalty. Günscher became one of the few men who enjoyed this rare privilege. The attempt on Hitler's life on July 20th, 1944 by Klaus von Stauffenberg marked a turning point. Günscher was not in the room when the bomb exploded, but he was one of the first to enter after the blast. He reportedly helped evacuate Hitler and coordinate first aid. From then on, the Führer's paranoia deepened. The circle of trust shrank even further. The shadow of betrayal hung over everyone, except for a few. Günscher was one of them. Over the following months, the Reich fell apart. Fronts collapsed one after another, and the Allied resistance advanced relentlessly. In January 1945, Hitler left the surface of Berlin for the last time and took refuge in the Führer bunker. He was accompanied by figures such as Joseph Goebbels, Martin Bormann, Eva Braun, Heinz Ling, and, of course, Otto Günscher. The latter, in addition to fulfilling duties, he was in charge of coordinating communications and ensuring the Führer's privacy. His confinement in the bunker brought about an accelerated deterioration of Hitler's image. Günscher witnessed his physical and mental collapse. The meetings became more erratic, the speeches more obsessive, and the outbursts of rage more frequent. Despite this, the young SS man maintained his composure. He knew that his fate was irrevocably linked to that of his superior. In the final days of April, as Soviet troops completely surrounded Berlin, Hitler wrote his political testament. On April 30th, 1945, after saying goodbye to his closest friends and having married Eva Braun the day before, the Führer locked himself in his room. Together with Eva, he committed suicide with a cyanide capsule and a gunshot to the temple. In the next room, Heinz Ling and Otto Günscher were waiting. When they entered, they found the lifeless bodies. Günscher had previously received a direct order. He was to ensure that Hitler's body did not fall into enemy hands. In fulfillment of this mission, he took the bodies to the garden of the Reich Chancellery. There, together with Linger, he wrapped the bodies in blankets, doused them with gasoline, and set them on fire. The smoke mingled with the sounds of Soviet artillery already pounding the ground. For the next few days, Günscher remained in the bunker, helping with the destruction of documents and coordinating final communications. Finally, on May 2nd, 1945, while attempting to flee Berlin, he was captured by Soviet forces. His identity was soon confirmed, and his fate was sealed. He was taken to Moscow and interrogated by the NKVD. His direct knowledge of Hitler's final moments made him a key source of information. He spent nearly a decade imprisoned in the Soviet Union under extremely harsh conditions until he was released in 1956, following efforts by the West German government. Upon his return, he lived discreetly, without writing memoirs or seeking prominence. Otto Günscher was the final witness and executor of one of the darkest chapters of the 20th century. His role was that of a faithful shadow that accompanied the Führer to the grave, and he died forgotten on October 2nd, 2003. Heinz Linger, Hitler's faithful assistant until his last days. Heinz Linger was born on March 23, 1913 in Bremen. From humble origins and a technical background, he worked as a bricklayer's apprentice before being drawn to the growing mystique of National Socialism. In 1933, shortly after Hitler's rise to power, he joined the SS. His disciplined conduct, neat appearance, and helpful attitude caught the attention of his superiors. In 1935, he was selected to join the Führer's team of personal assistants. Unlike Otto Günscher, Linger did not come from a purely military background. His role was more domestic, though no less important. He was Hitler's personal valet, responsible for his hygiene, clothing, daily routine, and private spaces. In the rigid structure of the Third Reich, these types of tasks did not involve servitude, but absolute trust. Linger was one of the few people allowed to enter Hitler's bedroom unannounced. Her role required discretion, silence, and unquestioning loyalty. For more than a decade, Heinz Ling witnessed the Führer's private life firsthand. He knew his habits, his phobias, his obsessions. He helped him dress, organized his belongings, prepared his meals, and was present every moment of the day, even during his travels. This closeness made Linge an almost invisible yet indispensable figure. During the Third Reich's heyday, Ling participated in official events, banquets, high-level meetings, and diplomatic encounters, always at a distance, that is, just one step behind Hitler. He didn't express his opinion, he didn't intervene, he didn't leave a trace. His presence, however, was constant. He was a silent witness to the dictator's physical and mental evolution, from the charismatic orator of the 1930s to the paranoid patient of his final days. Beginning in 1943, with the onset of military setbacks on the Eastern Front and growing Allied pressure in the West, Ling noticed the first signs of Hitler's deterioration. His gait became stiffer, the tremor in his left hand more noticeable, and his temper more irascible. Despite this, Ling did not leave his side. He was a servant, not a confidant. His loyalty was sealed. When Hitler moved into the Führer bunker in January 1945, Ling accompanied him without hesitation. During the months of confinement, her work intensified. She maintained a Spartan routine, preparing clothes, coordinating toilets, tidying private spaces, and attending meetings. She was also one of the few who regularly entered Hitler's bedroom and the rooms where Eva Braun was kept. Her closeness to both allowed her to witness the couple's last moments of intimacy. On April 29, 1945, Linge helped dress Hitler for his symbolic wedding to Eva Braun. That same evening, she accompanied him while he drafted his political and personal testaments. In these documents, Hitler designated successors and ordered the destruction of his remains to prevent them from being displayed as trophies. The next day, April 30th, Linge was standing meters away when Hitler and Eva Braun locked themselves in their private chambers. Minutes later, she heard the shot. Along with Otto Günsche, she entered the room and found the lifeless bodies. Hitler had shot himself in the temple. Eva had ingested cyanide. Following strict orders, Linge and Günsche moved the bodies to the Chancellery Garden, doused them with gasoline, and incinerated them. Linge remained in the bunker for several more days, organizing final tasks and destroying documents. Finally, he attempted to flee in disguise through the rubble of Berlin, but was captured by the Soviets on May 2, 1945. In Moscow, he was extensively interrogated by the NKVD. His testimony about Hitler's final days was considered key to officially confirming his death. He spent 10 years as a prisoner in the Soviet Union under extremely harsh conditions. He was released in 1955 and returned to West Germany. Unlike Günsche, Heinz Linge did publish his memoirs. In them, he describes in detail Hitler's daily life, his routine, and his obsessions. He died on March 9, 1980, leaving behind the testimony of a man who lived in the shadows of absolute power until the very end. Johann Rathenhuber, the soldier who served from the German Empire to the service of the Führer. Johann Rathenhuber was born on April 30, 1897 in Munich to a middle-class Bavarian family. At the age of 17, when the First World War broke out, he volunteered to serve in the German Imperial Army. He fought on the Eastern Front and earned several decorations for his valor. Although wounded in combat, he survived the conflict and returned to Germany in 1918, deeply scarred by the experience, like so many other veterans who would become part of the foundations of Nazism. With the dissolution of the empire and the establishment of the Weimar Republic, Rathenhuber sought out a career in civil service. He joined the Bavarian Security Police, where he made a career during the turbulent interwar years. In a time of instability and hyperinflation, failed coups, and clashes between communists and nationalists, Rathenhuber established himself as a tough, efficient, and determined officer. He was a man of action, marked by an authoritarian vision of order and duty. During the 1920s and early 1930s, he witnessed the growing political unrest engulfing Germany. In Bavaria, particularly in Munich, nationalist movements were gaining strength. It was in this context that Rathenhuber came into contact with members of the Nazi Party and the paramilitary groups that orbited Hitler's party, including the SA and later the SS. Although he was not initially an active member of the party, his ideological orientation was evident. He abhorred communism, distrusted parliamentarism, and saw authoritarian nationalism as the only way to restore German greatness. In 1933, after Adolf Hitler seized power, Rattenhuber was transferred to the national security apparatus, joining the criminal Polizei, and soon afterward the Reich Security Headquarters. That same year, he was called up to join the Führer's personal protection service. Unlike other members of Hitler's bodyguard, Johann Rattenhuber did not come from the SS but from the criminal police and had a solid professional background. His profile combined two virtues: operational efficiency and pragmatic loyalty. In 1933, he became head of the Führerschutzkommando, the unit charged with Hitler's immediate protection. This body, which would later evolve into the Reich Sicherheitsdienst, would have the exclusive mission of ensuring the Führer's safety, both on the move and at home. Under his leadership, the FSK professionalized its methods, adopting modern counterintelligence techniques, covert surveillance, and threat analysis. Rattenhuber was meticulous, silent, and distant. He did not cultivate a friendship with Hitler, nor was he part of the regime's inner circle. His relationship with the Führer was strictly professional. Nevertheless, his work was essential. Every visit, every train, every meeting or public appearance had to be inspected and controlled by his men. Every place where Hitler stayed had to be examined minutely, down to the last square meter. In the early years of the regime, the FSK and its leader operated in relative calm, but as the war progressed and threats multiplied, Rattenhuber's figure took on increasing importance, especially after the 1939 attack on the Bürgerbräukeler beer hall in Munich and the 1944 assassination attempt by Colonel von Stauffenberg. His powers and responsibilities expanded dramatically. An austere man with no political ambitions, Johann Rattenhuber represented a kind of tough, obedient civil servant who, without shining brightly, was a key player in the protection machinery surrounding Hitler. His profile, much less media-friendly than that of other leaders, allowed him to remain in the background during the regime's darkest years. As the Nazi regime consolidated, Johann Rattenhuber gained power within the security establishment of the Third Reich. In 1935, the Führerschutzkommando he led was restructured and expanded, giving rise to the Reich Sicherheitsdienst, the Reich Security Service. Although formally subordinate to the general state security apparatus, the RSD reported directly to Hitler. Rattenhuber was confirmed as its head and would hold that position until the collapse of the regime. The RSD was staffed by agents trained in counter-surveillance, explosives detection, communications interception, identification of infiltrators, and personnel screening. They had the authority to carry out searches, arrests, and summary executions if the Führer's security demanded it. Their sphere of action extended both within and outside the Reich, accompanying Hitler on his visits to battlefronts, industrial facilities, or private residences such as the Berghof. During the war, Rattenhuber maintained a low profile, partly out of conviction, partly out of strategy. He did not participate in political decisions, nor did he have close ties to other Nazi leaders. His relationship with figures such as Himmler, Bormann, and Goebbels was formal, if not tense. His only superior was Adolf Hitler, and his sole mission was to ensure his survival. The failed attack of July 20, 1944, radically changed the internal security structure of the Reich. Although Rattenhuber was not directly held responsible, he was required to completely revise RSD protocols. He was one of the few officers to retain his position after the purge that followed the Stauffenberg plot, a sign of the trust Hitler still placed in him. In the final months of the war, when Hitler took refuge in the Führer bunker, Rattenhuber assumed oversight of all internal security within the complex. The bunker was divided into sections, with the RSD having jurisdiction over the upper level and the entrances. Rattenhuber organized rotating guards, set up listening posts, reinforced access doors, and maintained strict control over every entry and exit. His obsession with security bordered on paranoia, but in besieged Berlin, every step could be the last. Despite the prevailing despair, Rattenhuber remained calm. He oversaw the running of the bunker like a methodical administrator. He kept abreast of military reports, attended daily meetings and, above all, ensured that no threat penetrated the Führer's final refuge. He even organized the training of special troops for a possible defense of the bunker, although everyone knew that such resistance would be symbolic and brief. On April 30th, 1945, when Hitler committed suicide along with Eva Braun, Rattenhuber was immediately informed by Heinz Linger and Otto Günsche. After verifying the Führer's death, he did his duty. He sealed the accesses and ordered his men to continue securing the compound until the Soviet command made it untenable. On May 1st, he organized the evacuation of some of the remaining personnel, including General Wilhelm Mohnke and radio operator Rochus. Misch Rattenhuber was one of the last to leave the bunker. However, a few blocks away, he was captured by Red Army forces. Interrogated and taken to Moscow, he was considered key to reconstructing the regime's final days. His testimony was recorded in multiple sessions with the NKVD and later with the KGB. Unlike other prisoners, Rattenhuber did not deny his loyalty, but he did not present himself as a fanatic either. He presented himself as an obedient, professional official and unaffiliated with the crimes of Nazism, although his closeness to Hitler made such a separation difficult to sustain. In 1950, he was tried in the Soviet Union and sentenced to 25 years in prison. However, he was released in 1955 as part of a political amnesty between Moscow and Bonn. He returned to West Germany, where he lived in relative anonymity until his death in 1957. Johann Rattenhuber was neither an ideologue nor a prominent war criminal, but for more than a decade he remained the silent sentinel of Europe's most feared dictator. His life ended as it began, amid archives, closed doors, and an obsession with absolute control. Rochus Misch, the Führer's communications operator. Rochus Misch was born on July 29, 1917, in Alt-Salkowitz, a small town in Silesia. Orphaned at a very young age as his parents died when he was barely 2 years old, he was raised by his maternal grandparents. In the poverty of the post-war period and the disintegration of the Weimar Republic, Misch was raised in a deeply nationalist, influenced by the economic crisis, post-Versailles resentment, and the promise of redemption offered by National Socialism. In 1937, at the age of 20, he joined the SS Verfügungstruppe, the paramilitary combat organization that would later become the Waffen-SS. He was assigned to the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler Regiment, the Führer's personal bodyguard. Although his initial motivation was to serve Germany as a soldier, he soon became entangled in the machinery of the leader's cult. With the outbreak of World War II in 1939, Misch participated in the invasion of Poland. During a clash, he was seriously wounded in the chest. After a long recovery, he was declared unfit for combat and reassigned to security duties. This relocation radically changed his destiny. He was selected to join Adolf Hitler's direct communications and security team at the Führer's headquarters and residences. From 1940, Misch worked as a telephone operator responsible for the Führer's secure communication lines. His position placed him in a key position. He was the intermediary between Hitler and his generals, ministers, and foreign allies. He decided nothing, offered no opinions, but listened to everything. He knew the voices, the tensions, the tones, and the silences of every important Nazi. From the corridors of the Berghof to the mobile bunkers of the Eastern Front, his presence was an invisible constant. Unlike other members of Hitler's entourage, Rochus Misch was not part of the inner circle, nor did he have direct access to the decisions of power, but he lived among them. He was present in the waiting rooms, in the adjoining rooms, in the command centers. His knowledge of the Führer's routine was absolute. Schedules, temperament, absences, visits. He was always behind a communications board connected to a network that sustained the regime from the shadows. His loyalty was structural, almost mechanical. He was neither an ideologue nor a fanatic, rather a cog that never hesitated to turn when required. He himself Chapter when Adolf Hitler took refuge in the Führer bunker in early 1945, Rochus Misch was transferred with him. His role as a communications operator made him essential in maintaining contact with the remnants of the Reich's military and administrative structure. From a small room lined with steel and concrete, Misch controlled the underground telephone exchange that still connected Hitler with his generals scattered throughout what remained of the Reich. The world was collapsing above ground, but he continued to hear voices. The chaos of the final weeks was absolute. The Reich Chancellery was under constant bombardment, access points were destroyed, and communications were increasingly erratic. Misch, however, remained at his post, rotating shifts with other operators and technicians. He received and transmitted orders that often no longer made sense, addressed to non-existent divisions, or to commanders who had already died. In the corridors of the bunker, the remnants of Hitler's inner circle intersected. Josef and Magda Goebbels, Martin Bormann, Otto Günscher, Heinz Linger, General Wilhelm Mohnke, and the Führer's personal secretaries. Misch wasn't part of the decisions, but he was there, always there. He watched, listened, mentally recorded. His memory was his only archive. In the days before Hitler's suicide, the atmosphere became stifling. News of the Soviet advance was damning. Berlin was surrounded, and surrender seemed inevitable. On April 30th, 1945, after receiving instructions on his political testament, Hitler locked himself and Eva Braun in his private room. Minutes later, the shot rang out. Misch, like the others, understood without needing confirmation. The silence that followed was more brutal than any explosion. Shortly after, he witnessed the transfer of the bodies to the garden, the cremation, and the final closure of the Hitlerian cycle. Misch remained in the bunker for a few more days. He was one of the last to operate the telephone line, trying to establish contact with German units or Soviet officers to negotiate a surrender. On May 2nd, when Red Army soldiers entered the complex, he was captured. Unlike other leaders, Rochus Misch was not considered a war criminal. He was interrogated extensively by the NKVD, and his knowledge of internal Reich communications made him a source of strategic information. He was transferred to multiple Soviet prisons and eventually sent to the Vorkuta POW camp in Siberia, where he spent 9 years. In 1954, he was released and returned to West Berlin. There, he opened a small painting and wallpapering business. He lived in relative anonymity for decades until in the 2000s. He began to receive public attention for having been the last surviving member of the Führer bunker staff. Unlike others, he never showed remorse. In interviews and memoirs, he repeatedly stated that he knew nothing about politics and was simply following orders. In 2006, he published his memoirs, I Was with Hitler, The Last Witnesses from the Bunker. The book caused controversy. In it, he showed himself loyal to the Führer to the very end and avoided any moral condemnation of the Nazi regime. For some, it was the voice of an honest witness. For others, an attempt to whitewash responsibility. Misch died on September 5, 2013, at the age of 96. He was the last survivor of the Führer bunker. His life, like his position at the switchboard, was marked by the background noise of power and the final silence of collapse. Later, he would admit that he never questioned the regime. He simply obeyed. During the war years, Misch accompanied Hitler on all his strategic movements. The Western Campaign, the visit to Paris, the meetings at Wolfschanze, the movements between Berlin and Bavaria. He set up communication stations, supervised transmissions, and ensured confidentiality. His name did not appear on documents or speeches, but his role was indispensable. When the war took an irreversible turn in 1943 and the Reich began to lose territory on all fronts, Misch was permanently transferred to the Führer bunker, where he managed the underground bunker's telephone exchange. There he worked under extreme conditions, between desperate calls, suicidal orders, and useless communications with the outside world. His life, like that of the regime he served, was reduced to an echo in the wires and static. During those years, Rochus Misch was a silent witness to the crumbling power he had served since his youth. He knew the fear of the generals, the anguish of the secretaries, the desperation of the aides, and Hitler's physical decline, but his role was clear: to maintain the connection even when there was nothing left to connect. Emil Maurice, the loyal bodyguard with impure blood. Emil Maurice was born on January 19, 1897 in Westphalia. With a technical background, he began his working life as a watchmaker. His destiny changed radically when he joined the National Socialist Party in its earliest stages in 1919, becoming one of the movement's first members and one of Adolf Hitler's oldest personal friends. Maurice was more than a supporter. He was one of the co-founders of the Stoßtrupp Hitler, the detachment of bodyguards created to protect the future dictator at his first rallies. He was part of the legendary guard that accompanied him during the years of political turmoil in Bavaria, even participating in the failed Munich Putsch of 1923, where he was arrested alongside Hitler and spent time in prison. During those years of confinement in Landsberg, his friendship with the Führer was deeply cemented. In an era when few were willing to risk themselves for the new party, Maurice was a trusted figure. His relationship with Hitler wasn't ideological or strategic, but deeply personal. He was, in many ways, a close friend, one of the few who could treat him with familiarity. However, his career within the party and the SS reached a turning point when, in the early 1930s, it was discovered that he had partial Jewish ancestry. Internal investigations revealed that one of his great-grandfathers was Jewish, which, under the regime's racial laws, made him a Mischling of the second degree and disqualified him from SS membership. Heinrich Himmler demanded his immediate expulsion, but Hitler personally intervened. He drafted a formal exception for Maurice, authorizing him to remain within the SS, for his proven loyalty and merits in the early years of the movement. This action generated tensions within the high command as it contradicted the regime's ideological precepts. The relationship between Himmler and Maurice was permanently damaged. Despite this conflict, Emil Maurice was discreetly kept out of the spotlight. He played no leading role within the SS, nor participated in any documented crimes during the conflict. During the war, he was transferred to the Luftwaffe, where he served as a technical officer. His role was administrative, with no direct participation in combat. Unlike other high-ranking officers, he never achieved relevant positions in the extermination apparatus, nor was he part of decisive military operations. At the end of the war, Maurice was captured by the Allied forces. He was interrogated, but his closeness to Hitler was not enough to consider him a war criminal. He was not held criminally responsible, and he was interned in a denazification camp where he was classified as a second-level sympathizer. He spent several years in detention in Germany, but was released without further consequences. In the post-war period, Emil Maurice remained distant from politics and the public eye. He returned to his profession as an optician and watchmaker and lived discreetly in Munich. His relationship with Hitler, although well known, was relegated to the past. He published no memoirs or gave revealing interviews. He died on February 6, 1972. Maurice was an ambiguous figure, the dictator's faithful bodyguard and close friend, and at the same time a man who embodied an intolerable contradiction for the regime he helped build. His permanence in the system, thanks to Hitler's direct intervention, is one of the few documented exceptions to the Third Reich's relentless racial policy. Julius Schreck, the Führer's first bodyguard. Julius Schreck was born on July 13, 1898, in Munich in the Kingdom of Bavaria. He was a key figure in the early years of the National Socialist Party, although his name eventually faded into the background of the official history of the Third Reich. However, without him, the genesis of Hitler's personal protection structures cannot be fully understood. A World War I veteran, Schreck joined the nascent nationalist movement led by Adolf Hitler very early on. He was a member of the National Socialist Party from 1920, and one of the first men to surround the future dictator with an aura of mysticism and authority. More than a bodyguard, he was a trusted companion, one of the men who earliest understood that Hitler must be protected not only physically but symbolically. In 1923, he participated in the failed Munich Putsch, for which he was imprisoned alongside Hitler in Landsberg prison. During that confinement, the bond between the two grew even stronger. Upon his release from prison, Schreck proposed the creation of a small, completely loyal unit to protect the party leader. Thus was born the Stoßtrupp, Hitler, a shock and protection force that can be considered the direct embryo of the SS. Schreck was its first commander, and the model he set decisively influenced the later creation of the Schutzstaffel. He himself led the SS during its founding in 1925, when it was still a tiny unit subordinate to the SA. In those early years, Schreck insisted that members of the corps display an almost religious devotion to Hitler. He himself dressed in dark uniforms and high boots, foreshadowing the militarized aesthetic the organization would later adopt under Himmler. His image, always serious and silent, contrasted sharply with the paramilitary bustle of the SA. In some ways, Schreck was the forerunner of the SS way, sober, efficient, and fanatically loyal. As the party grew and became institutionalized, Schreck shifted toward more symbolic roles. In 1926, he was replaced by Joseph Berchtold as head of the SS, although he remained close to Hitler as his personal chauffeur, bodyguard, and trusted aide. During this time, Schreck was part of the Nazi leader's inner circle. He traveled with him, accompanied him on tours across Germany, and acted as a silent aide during meetings with sympathizers and party members. However, Julius Schreck's career was cut short prematurely. In 1936, he contracted meningitis and died on May 16th of that year. He was just 37 years old. His death was deeply felt by Hitler, who paid him a personal tribute and ordered special funeral honors. He was buried in Munich, and for a brief time his name was remembered in party circles as a martyr of the movement. Despite his decisive role in the formation of the SS and the construction of Hitler's symbolic apparatus of power, Julius Schreck's name gradually fell into obscurity. He was not part of the regime's crimes, nor did he actively participate in World War II. But he was one of the first to understand that Hitler's figure should be protected as that of a monarch or a messiah, and to build a fence of iron and faith around him. Ernst Röhm, the homosexual revolutionary who built the muscle of Nazism and was betrayed by Hitler. Ernst Röhm was born on November 28, 1887, in Munich, in the heart of Bavaria. Coming from a family with a military tradition, he naturally followed the military path. He graduated as an officer in the Imperial Army and fought in the First World War, where he was wounded several times and decorated for his valor. His experience at the front left a profound mark on him, developing a visceral contempt for liberal parliamentarism and an almost mystical cult of action, strength, and vertical order. After the collapse of the German Empire in 1918, Röhm became one of the thousands of demobilized officers who found themselves in the Freikorps, the nationalist paramilitary militias, which became a new space for combat. He was a fierce and ruthless organizer, participating in the repression of communist movements in Bavaria and other German regions. His ideological commitment became increasingly radical. For Röhm, democracy was a betrayal of the bloodshed at the front. In 1919, at the height of the revolutionary fervor, he met Adolf Hitler, a minor orator in the nascent German Workers' Party. Röhm was impressed by the war veteran's vehemence, while Hitler recognized in Röhm a man with military connections, organizational experience, and an absolute willingness to use violence. Thus began one of the most strategic and ultimately tragic alliances in the history of Nazism. In the following years, Röhm put his network of contacts, his ability to recruit veterans, and his unqualified brutality to work for the party. It was he who founded and organized the party's first assault units, the Sturmabteilung, or SA, also known as the Brown Shirts. Under his leadership, the SA became a street force tasked with protecting Nazi party rallies, breaking up rival party events, and sowing political terror in the streets. Röhm had a very clear vision. The SA should not be merely a tool of protection for Hitler, but the foundation of a future revolutionary army. He believed that the old Prussian military elite should be swept away and replaced by a new fighting class. made up of ideologically committed men born of street fighting. This line of thinking would later clash head-on with Hitler's ambitions to ally with the traditional army. In 1923, Röhm actively participated in the Munich Putsch, the attempted coup d'état that ended with Hitler and other Nazi leaders in prison. Unlike the others, Röhm was never convicted and continued his nationalist activism abroad in the following years, particularly in Bolivia, where he worked as a military advisor. However, he maintained contact with Hitler, and when Hitler resumed leadership of the party in 1925, he called him back to Germany. In 1930, Hitler again offered him supreme command of the SA, which was then experiencing an internal crisis. Röhm immediately accepted, and under his leadership the organization expanded with alarming rapidity. By 1933, when Hitler came to power, the SA had more than 3 million members. It was an armed force parallel to the regular army and completely loyal to Röhm. This situation generated unsustainable tension. Röhm believed that the true objective of the movement was total revolution, even if that meant clashing with the conservative aristocracy and career soldiers. Hitler, on the other hand, needed the support of the army to consolidate his power, and he began to see Röhm as a dangerous threat. Röhm also made no secret of his homosexuality, an open secret that publicly challenged the official morality of the regime. Although Hitler downplayed it in his early years, his political enemies, especially Heinrich Himmler and Hermann Göring, began to use this information as an argument to demand his elimination. A clash between the two worlds, Röhm's revolutionary world and Hitler's strategic world, would become inevitable. By 1933, Ernst Röhm was one of the most powerful figures in Nazi Germany. As supreme commander of the SA, he had transformed what was once a small street militia in an army of millions of men. His authority was unquestioned within the organization, and his loyalty to Hitler, although steadfast, was beginning to coexist with an overwhelming ambition. Röhm not only aspired to maintain the power of the SA, but to absorb the Reichswehr, the regular army, and establish a new revolutionary armed force under his control. This idea, which Hitler tolerated for years, became a direct threat when he began negotiating with the military high command for a definitive transition of power. The Prussian generals, guardians of an elitist and conservative tradition, demanded one condition for swearing loyalty to Hitler as head of state: the elimination of Röhm and the end of the autonomous power of the SA. At the same time, an internal campaign driven by Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, and Hermann Göring, head of the Gestapo and the Luftwaffe, began to undermine Röhm's position. Reports were compiled, meetings were spied on, figures were inflated, and fears were stoked that Röhm was organizing an internal coup against Hitler. Although there was no conclusive evidence of a conspiracy, the atmosphere was ripe for decisive action. Röhm's homosexuality was a key element in the smear campaign. Although it had been a known secret for years, Hitler had tolerated it out of personal loyalty. But in the puritanical and paranoid atmosphere of the Nazi regime, his sexual preferences were used as an excuse to justify what was to come. Official propaganda would begin to portray him as a moral deviant and a threat to German youth. The pretext was sealed in June 1934. Hitler, after weeks of pressure from the army, signed the order to eliminate Röhm and the top SA leaders. The operation was called Night of the Long Knives and was carried out between June 30th and July 2nd. Hitler personally traveled to the spa town of Bad Wiessee, where Röhm and other SA leaders were meeting for a retreat. There he ordered his arrest and that of the entire leadership. Over 200 people were arrested, many summarily executed. Röhm was taken to Stadelheim prison, where he was offered a pistol with which to commit suicide. He refused, saying that Hitler should kill him with his own hands. He was finally assassinated on the 1st of July 1934 by two SS officers, Theodor Eicke and Michael Lippert. Röhm's assassination marked a historic rupture. The SA was immediately dismantled as an independent political force and subordinated to the new order imposed by the SS. Hitler presented the purge as a preemptive action to avoid betrayal, and the Reichstag applauded the measure. By decree, the Führer assumed personal responsibility for the crimes committed. Röhm's name was removed from all official documents of the regime, his image was erased from photographs, and his legacy was reduced to a few mentions in the secret archives. But his role was fundamental. Without Röhm, the rise of Nazism would not have been possible. It was he who gave substance to street violence, who organized the muscle of the party, and protected Hitler when he was an unknown agitator. In an ironic twist, bitterly, Röhm was betrayed by the very man he had helped bring to power. His execution was not only a political act, but also a symbolic one. The National Socialist Revolution was sacrificing its most radical elements to consolidate itself as an authoritarian regime. After his death, violence would no longer be uncontrolled or popular, but state-based and organized. Ernst Röhm, the military man who dreamed of a Germany of plebeian soldiers, died like so many others under Nazism, a victim of the system he helped to build. Ulrich Graf, the bodyguard who was shot protecting Hitler. Ulrich Graf was born on July 6, 1878 in Bavaria in southern Germany. With a rural background, he worked from a young age in agricultural labor and minor administrative jobs. He had no formal military training, but he did have a strong inclination toward nationalist politics and authoritarian order. During the years following World War I, amid the chaos of the Weimar Republic, Graf joined paramilitary movements such as the Freikorps, in which he participated in the suppression of communist uprisings. He was one of the first to join the National Socialist German Workers' Party, joining in 1919. In that context, he met Adolf Hitler, to whom he offered his services as a personal bodyguard. His strong build, his protective instinct, and his blind faith in the movement made him a fundamental member of the party's security circle. He was neither an ideologue nor an intellectual, but a man of action, loyal to a fault and unscrupulous in his use of violence. Ulrich Graf became one of the leading members of the small protective detail that surrounded Hitler at his public rallies, at a time when every speech posed a real risk of physical attack. He was one of the founders of the Stoßtrupp, Hitler, the original shock unit that would later lead to the creation of the SSS. Within the SS, Graf was known for his fanaticism and his willingness to put himself between his leader and any threat. However, his most famous moment came on November 9, 1923, during the failed Munich Putsch. That day, Hitler and his followers attempted to overthrow the Bavarian government by marching through the city center. When the police opened fire on the protesters, Ulrich Graf stepped between Hitler and the bullets. He was shot 5 times and fell seriously wounded, giving the future dictator time to avoid being hit. This action made him a symbol of loyalty within the Nazi movement. He was treated as a living martyr, and Hitler publicly mentioned him on several occasions as an example of absolute loyalty. Following the reorganization of the party and the founding of the SS in 1925, Graf was inducted into its ranks with the membership number SS number 1. Despite this symbolic honor, his operational role began to decline. With the professionalization of the security apparatus and the entry of figures such as Heinrich Himmler, Otto Günscher and Johann Rattenhuber, Graf was relegated to secondary functions. His figure was too rustic, too primitive for the new elitist and technocratic profile that the SS sought to impose. During the 1930s, Graf was used primarily for propaganda purposes, appearing at official events, parades and celebrations as the bodyguard who took the bullets for Hitler. His story was repeated as an example of sacrifice and self-denial, although his real power within the Nazi apparatus was practically nil. In 1936, he was elected to the Reichstag, a position he would hold for most of the Third Reich, although without any political weight. His presence in Parliament was decorative. During World War II, Ulrich Graf held no relevant posts or participated in military actions. His health deteriorated by wounds sustained in 1923, and his advanced age kept him away from the regime's operations. He lived in Munich as an honorary official and ceremonial member of the SS, receiving a salary from the party and occasionally participating in commemorations. In the final days of the Third Reich, he remained distant from the heart of power. He was not part of the Führer bunker staff, nor did he participate in the fall of Berlin. When the war ended, he was arrested by American forces and sent to a prison camp. He was classified as a collaborator with the regime, but no specific crimes were attributed to him. In 1948, during the denazification proceedings, he was sentenced as a lesser culprit, which allowed him to avoid a serious sentence. He spent several years on parole, never returning to public life. He died in Utting am Ammersee on March 3, 1950, in anonymity. Ulrich Graf represents the kind of figure that Nazism knew how to exploit as a symbol. A simple man, brutally loyal, without political ambitions or strategic vision, but useful as a living example of sacrifice. His life, reduced to an act of protection in 1923, was fixed in the regime's narrative as a reflection of the unreserved loyalty Hitler demanded of his followers. A bullet took him out of history, and a bullet kept him in it. Bruno Gesche, the reckless bodyguard who fell into disgrace. Bruno Gesche was born on November 5, 1905, in Berlin. He grew up in a working-class family. From a young age, he displayed a strong, impulsive personality marked by an intense fascination with power. In the early years of the Weimar Republic, as Germany experienced a period of economic crisis and political upheaval, Gesche found a means of expression in radical nationalism. In 1922, at just 17 years old, he joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party and was soon accepted as one of the first members of the Sturmabteilung. His unconditional loyalty, physical strength and boldness on the streets of Berlin made him stand out within the party's growing paramilitary apparatus. He was soon recruited to join the Stoßtrupp, Hitler, the personal bodyguard unit that protected Hitler in his first public appearances. Gesche actively participated in acts of violence, rallies, and clashes with political opponents. His reputation quickly grew as one of the Führer's most loyal defenders. With the founding of the SS, Gesche joined as a founding member and was one of the first to join Hitler's personal bodyguards. Unlike other, more sober or disciplined bodyguards, Gesche stood out for his recklessness. His behavior was impetuous, almost reckless, but Hitler appreciated this energy. During the 1930s, he made him head of the Begleitkommando des Führers, the unit directly responsible for his personal protection during public events. From 1932 onward, Gesche was present at most of the important events of the Nazi rise. Rallies in Nuremberg, the night of the Reichstag fire, the proclamation of the Third Reich, the annexation campaigns, and diplomatic receptions. Gesche was not an ideologue, but a man of action. He had personal access to Hitler, frequently slept in rooms near his own, and monitored the leader's every move on his travels. His team was expected to ensure that no physical threat could reach the Führer. Under his command, protection became a rigid protocol, including alternate routes, food control, room inspections, and constant training. However, Bruno Gesche also developed self-destructive behaviors. He was known for his excessive alcohol consumption, his aggressive off-duty behavior, and his tendency to provoke conflicts with other officers. For years, his closeness to Hitler allowed him to survive internal criticism and formal complaints. The Führer himself intervened on several occasions to prevent him from being dismissed for misconduct. Over time, Gesche's clashes with Heinrich Himmler, the SS commander-in-chief, became irreconcilable. Himmler, a bureaucrat obsessed with order, hierarchy, and ideological purity, viewed Gesche as an embarrassment to his organization. The conflict between the two was hidden but constant. Gesche made no secret of his contempt for Himmler and his entourage, and Himmler in turn looked for any excuse to remove him from the fold of power. The breaking point came in 1942 when Gesche, under the influence of alcohol, threatened a fellow officer with a firearm during an argument. The incident was brought directly to Himmler, who seized the opportunity to act. He ordered Gesche's demotion and expulsion from the Begleitkommando. Despite pleas from Gesche and some of his colleagues, Hitler did not intervene this time. Gesche was demoted and sent to the Eastern Front, where he served in a Waffen-SS combat unit. He was wounded in combat, decorated, and temporarily returned to Germany, but his reputation was ruined. Although he was never formally expelled from the SS, he was ostracized from the upper echelons. His role as the Führer's protector was taken over by more trusted men, including Franz Schädler and Otto Günsche. During the final years of the war, Gescher was transferred to various secondary assignments. Although he remained a member of the SS, he no longer had direct contact with Hitler or the regime's leaders. His fall was silent but definitive. He went from being a near shadow of absolute power to a forgotten veteran. At the end of the war, he was captured by American forces and subjected to interrogation. Having no direct involvement in war crimes, he was released after a denazification process in 1946, although he was barred from holding public office. He lived the rest of his life in West Berlin, where he worked in the private sector. He died on January 15, 1980, in relative anonymity. Bruno Gescher embodied the archetype of the loyal fanatic who, through his own recklessness and lack of control, became an uncomfortable figure even for the regime he helped establish. He was one of the first to stand by Hitler and one of the first to be forgotten by him. Reinhard Heydrich, the elegant executioner of the Third Reich. Reinhard Tristan Eugen Heydrich was born on March 7, 1904, in Halle an der Saale, into a cultured and musical family. His father was a composer and opera singer, which gave him a bourgeois childhood focused on discipline, culture, and nationalism. From a young age, Heydrich stood out for his sharp intelligence, his passion for fencing, and a cold, methodical nature that would remain with him until the end of his life. In the years following World War I, he joined the Reichsmarine, the German Navy, where he rose to the rank of lieutenant. However, in 1931 he was expelled for improper conduct following a love scandal involving an engaged woman. At 27, his military career seemed ruined, but that same year an interview with Heinrich Himmler changed his destiny forever. Himmler, then rising leader of the SS, was impressed by Heydrich's Nordic appearance, organizational skills, and knowledge of military intelligence. He recruited him to organize the party's intelligence service, the Sicherheitsdienst or SD. It was a historic decision. In a short time, Heydrich transformed the SD into a network of espionage and ideological surveillance that surpassed all previous structures. He quickly rose within the hierarchy of the Third Reich. In 1934, after the Night of the Long Knives, he was one of those in charge of carrying out the internal purge of the SA alongside Himmler and Göring. His ruthless efficiency impressed Hitler, who brought him into the regime's inner circle. From then on, Heydrich was not only head of the SD, but also director of the Gestapo, and from 1939, head of the Reichs Sicherheitshauptamt, which integrated all the security structures of the Nazi state. Heydrich was not, technically, Hitler's personal bodyguard, but he was one of those responsible for the security of the Führer and the Reich as a whole. From his office in Berlin, he designed policies of surveillance, repression, and extermination, maintaining the regime's internal order through terror and espionage. He was one of the main masterminds behind mass deportations, the destruction of the opposition, and the ideological surveillance of all of Germany. His role extended to every corner of the country and the occupied territories. His agents were present in universities, factories, state offices, and military barracks. Anyone suspected of disloyalty, from communists to Catholic priests, could be arrested, tortured, or executed on the orders of the apparatus Heydrich controlled. With an elegant face, refined manners, and a terrifying coldness, Heydrich was feared even within the regime. He was nicknamed the man with the iron heart. Hitler considered him the man with the most dangerous brain in the Reich. His flair for power, his lack of scruples, and his ability to maneuver among the most ambitious Nazi leaders made him a key figure in the totalitarian consolidation of the regime. In 1941, Heydrich was appointed protector of Bohemia and Moravia, the highest civilian post in occupied Czechoslovakia. From Prague, he imposed a brutal regime that combined economic efficiency with systematic repression. Shootings, deportations, and confiscations marked his administration. Despite this, he managed to contain social discontent and stabilize the region, further increasing his prestige with Hitler. But it was also in Prague that he met his end. On May 27, 1942, two members of the Czech resistance, trained by the British under Operation Anthropoid, ambushed the car in which Heydrich was travelling. A bomb thrown at the vehicle caused severe injuries. He died a week later, on June 4, 1942, following a widespread infection. The Nazi response was brutal. In revenge, the SS massacred the entire population of the village of Lidice, executing the men, deporting the women to concentration camps, and sending the children to Germanization or extermination centers. Heydrich's death was used as an excuse to redouble repression in Eastern Europe. After his death, Heydrich was honored with a state funeral in Berlin. Hitler did not hide his grief, describing him as the son I always wanted. His place was taken by Ernst Kaltenbrunner, but his repressive legacy left a deep mark on the security apparatus of the Third Reich. Heydrich was more than an enforcer. He was an architect of terror, a technocrat of extermination, and one of the most calculating minds of the Nazi regime. Had he lived, he would likely have played an even more sinister role in the final solution he himself helped engineer at the Wannsee Conference in January 1942. He died young, just 38, but his work endured. A bureaucratized, precise, silent apparatus of death. He was the elegant executioner, the one who didn't need to scream to kill. Erwin Rommel, the loyal marshal who ended up accused of treason. Erwin Johannes Eugen Rommel was born on November 15, 1891, in Heidenheim, in the Kingdom of Württemberg. The son of a schoolteacher, his military calling manifested itself early. He joined the Imperial Army at the age of 18 and fought with distinction in the First World War, where his courage and tactical skill earned him the Iron Cross and a solid reputation among his comrades. After the conflict, Rommel remained in the small Reichswehr of the Weimar Republic, where he slowly rose through the ranks in an institution marked by Prussian rigidity. He distinguished himself as an instructor and authored an influential tactical manual, The Infantry Attacks, published in 1937, which put him on the radar of the new Nazi military elite. It was during the years of the rise of the Third Reich that Rommel captured the attention of Adolf Hitler, who appointed him commander of the personal escort battalion during the invasion of Poland in 1939. His loyalty to the Führer, combined with his effectiveness, earned him the trust of the powers that be. In 1940, during the French campaign, Rommel commanded the 7th Panzer Division, which staged a spectacular breakthrough, earning it the nickname the Ghost Division for its speed and unpredictability. Recognition was immediate. Hitler promoted him to general and, in 1941, entrusted him with command of the Afrika Korps, sent to North Africa to rescue the battered Italian army. There the legend of the Desert Fox was born. Rommel proved to be a bold, flexible commander, deeply respected by both his troops and his enemies. Winston Churchill would describe him as a worthy and honourable opponent. Rommel combined a brilliant tactical mindset with a sober personal attitude. He despised the ostentation, sadism, and ideological anti-Semitism of the regime. Although admired by Hitler, he kept his distance from the powerful circles of the Nazi Party and avoided involvement with the SS or repressive actions. This moral reserve did not, however, prevent him from benefiting from the system or fighting under its banner with absolute discipline. In the most difficult years of African Corps, as supplies dwindled and defeats mounted, Rommel repeatedly called for a strategic retreat. Hitler refused, as he would repeatedly do with his generals. Rommel was eventually evacuated in 1943 due to health problems. He returned to Europe and was assigned to defend the Atlantic Wall, preparing the French coast for the imminent Allied invasion. During the Battle of Normandy in June 1944, Rommel attempted to stem the enemy advance, but ran up against a lack of resources and the stubbornness of the High Command. He knew the war was lost. By then, rumors of military conspiracies against Hitler were beginning to circulate in his circle. Although Rommel was never directly involved in the July 20th, 1944, plot to assassinate the Führer with a bomb at his headquarters, his sympathies with the conspirators were known. Several officers involved, such as General Hans Speidel, chief of his general staff, acted under his protection. Rommel defended the need to negotiate peace with the Western Allies, a position that in the Reich was already tantamount to treason. Hitler, his pride wounded after the failed attempt, unleashed a witch hunt. More than 7,000 officers were arrested and hundreds executed. Rommel could not be tried publicly. He was too popular, both within as well as outside of Germany. There were fears that public condemnation could demoralize soldiers at the front or even provoke an uprising among the soldiers. So a quiet solution was chosen. On October 14, 1944, two generals arrived at Rommel's residence in Herrlingen. They offered him a choice. He could face trial for high treason, which would end in execution and reprisals against his family, or commit suicide in exchange for military honors and safety for his loved ones. Rommel accepted the latter. Minutes later, he took a cyanide capsule inside a car. The regime announced that he had died of wounds sustained in Normandy. He was granted a full state funeral, and his death was publicly mourned by Hitler. Only after the war, after the fall of the Third Reich, did the details of his forced death become known. Rommel became a unique case. The Nazi hero who was ultimately executed by Hitler himself, a victim of his moral independence and his refusal to join in the pursuit of absolute fanaticism. He was never an active conspirator, but neither was he a blind accomplice. His figure was vindicated in the post-war period as an example of an honorable soldier, although his responsibility for fighting in the service of the regime does not disappear beneath his aura of a brilliant strategist. He died as he lived, with discipline, without scandal, and in silence. The Desert Fox did not fall in combat, but was caught by the same jaws he helped feed.